Okay, so today we're going to talk about police discretion. And those of you who are like, what do you mean by discretion? Are you talking about police secrets? No. I'm talking about decision making. What types of decisions do the police make? How should we control the decisions they are allowed to make? And then also, do they make good decisions? But then we can get into this super philosophical discussion of what is good and what is a good decision. Well, luckily, that's why we have the law. The thing with the police, and this is what kind of annoys me with them getting paid so little, is that they make the same decisions that doctors make. Yet doctors get paid more. Well, then you're like, well, doctors go to school for a long time. Yeah, well, so do I. So did I. And I don't get paid a lot. But that's not the case here. I don't make life or death decisions. But the police make similar life or death decisions. They can kill you. They can decide whether your life is ruined by taking you to jail or arresting you or charging you. Yet, we pay them maybe 50 grand a year, or sometimes 60, depending on where you live. Now, you might say, well, you don't even have to freaking, have a degree to become a cop. So, yeah. But that's the thing with me, is that if we have these people that are supposed to interpret the law, that have the right to kill us in certain circumstances and have the right to interpret when the law allows them to kill us, shouldn't we require them to get just a little bit more training? Shouldn't we maybe send them to university as long as we send medical doctors so that they can get a proper understanding of not just the law, but also science? I don't know. I just think that maybe if we paid our police officers like doctors and required the same standards from them as we do from doctors, well, then maybe we wouldn't have situations where a cantankerous old fart sits on the neck of an innocent black man and kills them in front of an audience of his peers and the whole public, causing riots. Sorry, that was my soapbox. In my opinion, we got real hardcore and deep there right off the bat. But in the end, we are talking about police decisions. The police don't just decide whether they arrest us or not, but they can decide how domestic disputes play out. Making an arrest, not making an arrest, deciding to arbitrate. Those of you who don't know much about domestic violence, the way that domestic violence works is that it starts slow. It starts with emotional abuse, and then it might turn into light verbal abuse, and then a little bit of physical abuse, and then it can go as far as death. So they can make the determination as to, should I arrest someone now? Should I take someone out of this equation? And domestic violence or domestic disputes are difficult because when you show up, you have two people who have a lot of baggage that they're now taking out on each other, and then there's oftentimes children involved. And then there's these other factors. Well, if I take the mom to jail, or I take both mom and dad to jail, or dad and dad, or mom and mom, or whatever the situation is, where does the child go? Does the child go into foster care? Well, how does that impact that person, that child, right? So these aren't easy decisions to make, yet we force people who don't even need to have a bachelor's degree to make these decisions. I mean, a medical doctor would have difficulty making a decision on that. At the same time, they can also decide whether to commit people for mental health reasons. They can decide who to pull over and when to pull them over. At what point is one more mile over the limit too much? They can decide to send a juvenile, to refer a juvenile delinquent or someone who's been arrested, a juvenile, to juvenile court, which could end them up in juvie. Right? That puts you on a nice direct pipeline for prison. And most importantly, in some cases, the law says that the police may use deadly force. So one way to look at police decision making, and I love this model, it's called the street level bureaucratic model. This term has been used by a multitude of scholars. However, John Q. Wilson was the first one to really bring it to the world's attention. And John Q. Wilson said that police officers are really street level bureaucrats, right? They're part of this bureaucracy, which is, police organizations, and they have to process people, right? Just like someone at the DMV takes your paperwork and they're like, oh, this is not good enough, come back again, and you have to wait in line for 3 hours again and you hate yourself. The police essentially are the same thing as that, except they have a couple of extra things that make them different, like guns and cuffs, right? But just like the person at the DMV who likes to make your life hell sits there and interprets the rules and the policies and then takes action based on that, well, it says that you needed to bring a bill that has your address on it, but this is not a sufficient type of bill. We needed a water bill, a credit card statement. It's not good enough, so get out of here and sit in line again for 3 hours next Saturday, and I will personally find joy in seeing you wait and ruining your weekends 2 weekends in a row, right? That's the DMV people. But police officers are the same. They have all of these bureaucratic laws. They have the actual law, the criminal law, substantive law, right, that says this is right, this is wrong, this is a crime, this is not a crime. Then they have procedural law that says this is a probable cause, this is not probable cause, this is when you can use this type of force, this is when you can use that type of force. And then you have your own police department's policies, like your police chief might say, if you encounter anyone that has a open misdemeanor warrant, I want you to arrest them and take them to jail, right? So these are the three main bureaucratic controls over the police officers. And then when they encounter an actual situation in the street, they have to make a decision based on all of these bureaucratic controls, right? So they're a street level bureaucrat, whereas a police chief might be an administrative level bureaucrat, or a DMV worker might be a really annoying bureaucrat. No, I'm just kidding. A DMV worker might also be more of an administrative bureaucrat. The police officer is a street level bureaucrat. Now, one thing that is kind of crazy, right, is that at most police agencies, the newest officers are put directly into patrol, meaning that the people with the least amount of experience interpreting the laws and policies and procedural law are the ones making the decisions about people's lives. The problem also with patrol, and this is even the case, even after body cameras, I know this because my research found this, is that the further down the bureaucracy you go, so the closer to the patrol officer you go, the more discretion you have. I don't have a problem with the police having discretion. In fact, I believe police should have almost unfettered discretion. But at the same time, they have to go to school for longer, and we have to pay them a lot more. And they have to be on a pretty strict, 2 strikes and you're out rule. But I personally believe we should let the police make more decisions on their own. We should let patrol officers make decisions. They should decide when to arrest someone. There shouldn't be rules that says whenever you see this type of misdemeanor, you must arrest them. I don't think that's good for community relations. I don't think that's good for justice in general. However, putting the newest people with very limited training, when you go to the academy, you pretty much learn how to shoot, you learn a couple rules, and the rest is just PE. There is no real training on the tragic human condition, right? This guy named Mir, he said that a good police officer is someone who understands the tragedy of being a human being. And that everyone is Every human being has a story that humanizes them. Even the most evil, rotten people have that story. After all, everyone is at some point a cute baby, right? That's one thing I noticed when my child was born. I remember looking at her, I was like, whoa. Even like the people I hate the most in the world were once this innocent, clean slate child. And something got them from here to whatever, demon-possessed person they are now. And when that happens, in that process, there is tragedy. And so William Muir said, a good police officer knows when to understand human tragedy. However, has the moral compass to know when to use coercive force. Right? He says you get some police officers that get the human tragedy, but then they're too reluctant to eliminate that evil. Other police officers just look at the law. They let the law define people as good or bad. But a great police officer is someone who looks beyond the law and says, this person did something bad. And in this case, I am going to throw down with them. And I am going to take them to jail. But at other times, I might say, this person did something bad. But this is a result of the tragedy in their lives. And in this case, I need to not take this person to prison. Or to jail, sorry. When it comes to police discretion, since the police have all of this opportunity to make life or death decisions, there is obviously so much room for abuse or misuse. Discrimination, classism, right? One thing that we learn is that oftentimes, not all, but many police officers come from a middle-class white culture, which is not the same as black culture or Hispanic culture or upper-class black culture or a lower-class black culture, right? All your class and race does seem to create different subcultural views that people adhere to. And this is probably something that many of you are learning now that you're in college, where you're sort of forced in close proximity with people who come from myriad backgrounds, right? That's something that I remember learning in college. I also learned it moving from South Africa to the United States. But what human beings normally do, and police officers are guilty of this too, because they are also human beings, but they're human beings who have more legal privilege than the rest of us. And that is, we often measure people by our own cultural standards, or through our own cultural standards. And we don't really realize that we're doing it, right? We assess people through our own lens of understanding and our own morals. Right? I remember, and so when a police officer has the discretion to arrest someone or use force on someone, right? They can, and they're interpreting someone of a different class or a different racial background. They're measuring their behavior through their own sense of what's right and wrong. They might not realize that they're inadvertently discriminating against that person. So there are many ways we can contain or control discretion. We can control it through the law, through court decisions, right? You'll have every officer be like, well, Matt versus Ohio says blah, 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 right? Police officers will have all kinds of knowledge of court hearings that says what they can and cannot do. You can also have administrative things. So within your police department, there might be a new policy. You must arrest anyone that has an open misdemeanor warrant. Science. Your understanding of science can control the way you make decisions, right? If that Dusenberry that killed George Floyd had a better understanding of science, he might have known, oh wait, you can't restrict blood flow from someone's head for as long as I am by putting my knee on their neck. Science, bruh. Or you might be aware of hotspots policing science. Right? One of my previous students from the University of Southern Indiana has now become a police officer at the Indianapolis police, and he tells me all the time how he looks at hotspots and tries to find all the hotspots within his beat, and tries to be there. He tries to do what's known as the Coper curve, where essentially this guy named Chris Coper, he was on my dissertation committee, but he found that if police officers spend about 10 to 14 minutes in a crime hotspot at a time, and then leave and then come back randomly throughout the day and only spend about 10 to 14 minutes, you have the maximum amount of deterrence in that zone. Because essentially it's kind of like, think about your own criminal activity, right? You might want to smoke some weed, and then bam, you see a cop and you're like, I'm not smoking weed right now. Then the cop leaves and you're like, well, when are they coming back? I think they're gone for good. All right, I'm going to spark up again, and bam, cop's there again. You're like, oh my gosh, I didn't expect them to come back so quickly. When are they going to come back again? And then they don't come back for like 8 hours, and you're like, oh, looks like it was just a fluke. Oh, bam, there they are again, right? So it keeps criminals on their toes, because the second a criminal or a potential criminal or motivated offender can determine what the police's like rhythm is, they can figure out how to commit crime. But if you don't have a particular rhythm, and you stay just long enough to become a nuisance when you're there, it can really deter crime. And so he was changing his discretion based on his understanding of science. And then there's also police culture, right? Because there's this cultural element to it where you're like, well, this is the older, more experienced person. I'm going to mimic their behavior, and I'm assuming that they probably have a better understanding of departmental policies than me. That's police culture. And you have professor culture at SUNY Oswego. You have student culture. You guys have a little culture there, right? You all hate us professors because they're unfair. I am not that unfair. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. I can see how some people see me as being unfair, or some people see me as being too harsh on writing. You'll thank me one day. Again, there are also other factors that influence discretion, right? I'd say situational factors are probably the most important. 99% of them, if you were to ask them and put truth serum on them, the seriousness of the crime would definitely be the number one factor. And then you get stuff like the strength of evidence, right? Like if you call the cops and you tell them something, you accuse someone of something, but there's almost no direct evidence that corroborates your story, it'd be difficult for them to make an arrest, right? And they can get in trouble if they make that arrest. Oftentimes, the demeanor of the either the suspect or the victim can influence the behavior, the decisions that the police make. That's why whenever you interact with the police, always be respectful and nice, even if you know they're wrong. Chances are someone is probably recording it. If you come off as the nice, courteous citizen and the police officer decides to hit you in the face, they'll get fired. But you don't want to be the defiant, screaming citizen who then gets punched in the face. Even if you're in the right, there's still going to be a large enough group of people who would debate that. There's also social and political aspects, right? You get your local political culture, and then you get your national political culture, right? Might influence the decisions that police officers make. Some might feel more emboldened to use force, while others might be extremely scared to even use the smallest amount of force. So how do we control police discretion? Well, the best way that seems to work is to do it through rulemaking. But what happens if we control discretion all the way? What if the police are like robots, where they have to have to make an arrest if they see something wrong. Sure, you'll have more equality, you'll have fewer disparities, you would think. But the police would still be hanging out in poorer areas, and you would put more poor people in prison. And I'm not saying the police are overtly classist. I'm just saying it's easier to catch a poor person doing something wrong than it is a middle-class or rich person, right? Think about, I don't know what socioeconomic status you're from, but I came from the middle class, okay? I remember one time my friend brought marijuana over. This was in the summer. I was home from college. My friend brought some marijuana over. My parents were both at work because, again, middle class. Parents both had 9-to-5 jobs. So I said, hey, guys, come on over. And my family lived at the end of a cul-de-sac. We had woods on every side of our house, except for the one neighbor we had a massive hedge between. So no one could see what we were doing outside on our deck in the backyard. So I said, hey, my friend's name was Omar. I said, hey, Omar, come over, bring your weed. I have a bong, right? And so we sat there and we smoked weed in the bright of daylight, enjoyed it, ordered some pizza, and that was how we spent that entire day. And then at like 4:30, right before my parents came home, we made sure that we got out of there. But if you are from a poorer neighborhood, where maybe you just live with your mom, your 3 siblings, and maybe your cousins and uncle also live in that small 2-bedroom apartment that you're all sharing because that's what you can afford. Maybe mom and uncle have different work schedules. Maybe mom works night shifts, uncle works day shifts. So there's really no time where you have any privacy. And so now you want to smoke some weed. Well, what's the best way to do it? You try to smoke it in your apartment. Maybe your mom's like, you better not be bringing that stuff into my house. I work too hard for you to be bringing the police up in here to arrest me, to take away my kids, take away your sisters, all because you want to smoke some weed. You get that stuff out of my house. I don't want the stuff in my house. Fine. But I'm still going to smoke this weed. I bought it. I paid it $60 for this eighth. No, that's only those like rich kids with like the polo shirts pay that much. Whatever. Let's say I paid $10 for this dime bag. Whatever. You might find an alley somewhere. You might find a park. But it's going to be in public. Would it be easier to catch me and my friends out on the deck in a secluded neighborhood smoking our weed? Or would it be easier catching the kids smoking weed in the alley or in the park? That is systematic classism. And even if you control every single decision that the police makes, you must arrest this, you must arrest that, you're still going to see more poor people in prison, more poor people in jail, more poor people having interactions with the police. And it's not going to change anything in that regard.